Welcome to Moonlight Mate Stories. Tonight, under the silver glow of the moon, you'll hear a tale of love, power, and destiny. Sit back, close your eyes, and let the moon guide your heart. The sky tore itself open with a flash of lightning, illuminating the twisted trunks of the ancient forest. Rain pounded the earth like the drums of a war that no one had invited her to. Mira ran, bare feet sinking into the mud, slipping on roots slick with water, her breath ragged and shallow. Every muscle ached, every heartbeat thudded like a warning. Her arms were smeared with blood, not all her own, with claw marks that burned and throbbed, a reminder that she had already barely survived the night. She glanced over her shoulder. Shadows moved through the downpour, swift and silent. Wolves, but not ordinary wolves, rogue Alpha loyalists, with eyes like molten silver and teeth sharp enough to carve fear into flesh. They were hunting her, their growls low and primal, a sound that vibrated through the ground into her bones. Panic lanced through her chest, cold and sharp, yet somewhere beneath it was something hotter, something unfamiliar that stirred inside her. The silver flame that she had long tried to hide. The first flare erupted as she stumbled over a fallen branch, burning up her arm, threatening to consume her from within. She gasped, biting back a scream, her fingers clutching the glowing amulet around her neck. The amulet pulsed with light, humming a deep, resonant vibration against her chest, almost like it had a heartbeat of its own. She didn't understand it, not yet, but she knew it was her lifeline, her secret, and possibly the only thing standing between her and the shadow wolves closing in. The wind tore through the trees, bending them in unnatural arcs, and the rain mingled with her tears, as if the heavens themselves were mourning her plight. Each flash of lightning painted her fear in stark relief, the terror of being hunted, the anger at being so powerless, the ache of knowing she had no one to trust. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't afford even a second to falter. A distant howl ripped through the night. Mira's pulse jumped. It was a call, a warning, a declaration. "We are coming." Her stomach knotted. She pressed herself against the wet bark of a tree, chest heaving, as she tried to calm the magic thrumming inside her. The amulet's glow intensified, casting silver light onto the rain-slicked leaves, painting her small, trembling figure in defiant brilliance. She could feel the energy trying to surge outward, her own power threatening to reveal itself to the very hunters she wished to escape. Lightning struck again, closer this time, and in that momentary illumination, she saw them. The shadow wolves, sleek and deadly, moving like living smoke through the forest. Their eyes glinted with hunger and something darker, something deliberate. Mira's legs trembled, yet she forced them to move, sloshing through puddles, pulling herself along the jagged terrain, her fingers scraping against rocks, roots, and wet moss. Pain shot through her arms, but the deeper, more terrifying pain was the fear of being caught, of being consumed, of the magic inside her being unleashed in a moment she couldn't control. She stumbled, and a shard of lightning illuminated her face. A mixture of determination, raw fear, and something else, something deeper. She whispered a prayer to the moon goddess, her voice almost lost in the roar of the storm. "Guide me, protect me, let me survive this night." Her lips trembled with desperation. Ahead, the Moonfall River crashed and churned, whitecaps dancing violently in the torrent of rain. Mira's heart leapt, a mix of hope and terror. Crossing the river could mean freedom, but it could also mean death. She ran faster, ignoring the searing pain in her arms, the throbbing of her heels, the sting of cold that seeped into her bones. The wolves were closer now. She could hear the rhythm of their footsteps over the pounding of the storm, the wet slap of claws against earth, the guttural growls vibrating through the air. Mira reached the riverbank and pressed herself behind a jagged boulder, water roaring beside her. The amulet pulsed violently, responding to the danger, glowing brighter than the moon, almost as if it were alive. Her chest heaved, the silver flame surged within her, threatening to burn, threatening to betray her. She pressed her hands to her arms, trying to keep the fire contained. She had trained herself for years to suppress it, to hide it from the world, but tonight, the fear was too great, the need too raw. A growl, low and menacing, came from behind the boulder. Mira froze, muscles locked, teeth clenched. Her eyes darted to the darkness, straining to see through the sheets of rain. She could feel their presence, the shadow wolves circling, hunting, aware of her every move. The storm seemed to pulse with the predator's anticipation, matching her heartbeat, her fear, her desperation. The amulet hummed louder, almost unbearably, vibrating against her chest. Mira gritted her teeth and whispered again to the moon goddess, a plea mingled with defiance. "I am not yours to take, not tonight, not ever." Her fingers clenched around the artifact. Light poured from it, silver white, illuminating her face in streaks as the storm raged around her. The shadow wolves paused, unnervingly still, as if the light had frozen them in place. Mira's body trembled from exhaustion, pain, and the raw energy thrumming through her veins. She felt the power inside her clawing for release, demanding recognition, whispering that she was more than a hunted girl, that she was something the world had feared, something dangerous, something vital. A sudden crash from the underbrush made her jump. A figure moved through the storm, emerging in the brief lightning glare. Mira's breath caught in her throat. She clutched the amulet tighter. Whoever it was, human or otherwise, might be friend or foe, but the presence alone made her pulse spike. Heavy footsteps approached, deliberate, measured, radiating strength, power, and an unknowable intention. Mira held her breath. She could feel the electricity in the air, mixing with the storm, with her power, with the fear that had driven her this far. Another growl, closer now, made her flinch. The shadow wolves were near. But the figure advancing did not call out, did not attack. They simply came, and in their eyes was a recognition, a knowing, a pull she didn't understand but could feel deep in her bones. Lightning split the sky one final time, and Mira saw the figure clearly. Strong, imposing, a presence that both terrified and intrigued her. The storm seemed to bow around them, the rain momentarily lightening, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Mira's legs refused to move, trapped by awe, fear, and the strange sense that destiny had finally reached out and touched her in this moment of utter chaos. She pressed herself tighter against the boulder, holding the amulet as her heart pounded and the silver flame danced beneath her skin. Her whisper cut through the storm, barely audible. "I will survive. I must survive." And with that, the storm's roar became a soundtrack to a night that would change her life forever. A night where fear, power, and destiny collided at the Moonfall River. If this story pulls you in, subscribe to Moonlight Mate Stories. Every full moon, we tell tales that make your heart race. The rain had soaked her to the bone, her bare feet bleeding from the jagged roots and mud-slick rocks. Mira Vale's body trembled uncontrollably as she pressed herself against the boulder by the Moonfall River. Her chest heaved, each breath a razor cutting through exhaustion, fear, and the remnants of the silver flame that had nearly consumed her. The amulet's light had dimmed, but she could still feel it pulsing softly against her chest. A heartbeat, a tether to something she couldn't yet name. She had no idea how long she had been hiding, listening to the shadows shift, listening to the low, haunting growls that made her teeth ache with fear. And then she collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully. Her legs gave way beneath her, slick with rain and fatigue, and she fell into the mud. Her arms ached, and the wound along her forearm stung with a fire that seemed to pierce all the way to her bones. She tried to move, to crawl, to drag herself further into safety, but the world around her seemed to spin. The storm roared above, lightning flickering across the sky, illuminating her battered form. her trembling fingers clutching the amulet. And then, nothing. Darkness swallowed her, not the comforting kind, not even the peace of unconsciousness. This was a void, a terrifying emptiness, and in it she felt the strange magnetic pull of another presence. Something, someone, strong, commanding, alive, was near. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, a haze of pain clouding her vision. She blinked, rain dripping from her hair into her eyes, stinging her vision, blurring the world. And then she saw him, strong arms, scarred, solid, holding her with the kind of strength that made her chest ache in ways she couldn't name. The storm seemed to pause. The rain lightened almost imperceptibly, as if the world itself had noticed him. And those eyes, molten gold, burning with a light that seemed to pierce the very air, the very soul of anyone who dared meet them. He was in danger and protection all at once, and Mira's heart leapt with something she didn't understand. Fear? Attraction? Both? "You shouldn't be here, Mira Vale." His voice was low, controlled, authoritative, but with a faint undertone of curiosity, almost regret. She tried to speak, to answer, to explain, but no words came, her throat constricted, her lips trembling, as if the sound A of his voice alone had stolen her voice. She had never seen anyone like him, never anyone who could make her feel so simultaneously drawn and terrified. The heat of her fear mingled with something stranger, something electric, a pull she couldn't resist even if she wanted to. The strong arms shifted slightly, steadying her. He scanned the surrounding forest with a predator's awareness, his gaze sharp and assessing. She could feel his tension, the way his body seemed to hum with controlled power. He knew exactly what he was dealing with, and he knew her name before she had even spoken. That simple fact ignited something inside her, a spark of wonder mingled with fear. How could he know her name? Who was he? A rough, questioning voice interrupted, breaking the fragile moment. "Alpha, who is she?" The Beta of Silver Ridge stepped forward, cautious, uncertain. Mira barely noticed him at first, too mesmerized by the aura of raw authority emanating from the man holding her. Rylan's head snapped sharply toward the Beta, his gaze cutting like a blade. No words, only a glare, and the Beta faltered, shrinking under the intensity of that molten gold stare. "She stays," Rylan said finally, voice low, commanding. "For now." Mira's breath caught. She had never heard such certainty, such protection, and it made her heart twist with relief and confusion. The storm continued its furious dance above them, lightning splintering the sky, rain drumming relentlessly on the forest canopy. But under that fierce, primal night, she felt a small, fragile shield of safety around her. Not complete safety, not yet, but protection enough that her trembling fingers could unclench slightly. He carried her through the storm, as though she were weightless. Every step was measured, controlled, and yet gentle, a paradox that she didn't understand. Her wet hair clung to her face, mud streaked across her skin, and the ache in her arms and legs screamed at her. But she didn't dare struggle. She didn't dare pull away. Because with every heartbeat, she could feel the rhythm of his strength, his presence, wrapping around her like armor. The journey was both silent and deafening. The storm filled the world with noise, but in the space between, she could hear the unspoken things, the weight of his gaze, the quickening of his breath as he moved, the slight tension in his jaw that betrayed emotions he otherwise hid. Mira had always been sensitive to the world's subtle currents, but nothing had ever felt as alive, as intense, as dangerous as this. When they finally arrived at the Silver Ridge safe house, she was gently set down on a dry bench inside a warm room. The contrast was staggering. The storm outside, violent and chaotic, and here, the air was thick with the scent of pine, earth, and the faint tang of fire from the hearth. Mira's fingers lingered on the amulet, still warm against her chest, as she tried to process the events of the last hour. The wolves within the safe house were immediately aware of her presence. Whispers threaded through the shadows, soft, sharp, and fearful. Cursed? Dangerous? Do you think she can control it? Mira's heart sank, her pulse accelerating, but Rylan stood like a sentinel between her and the world, his body a barrier, his gaze sweeping across the room with unwavering vigilance. "You are safe," he said softly, "but not without authority. No one will touch you." Even so, she could feel the weight of their eyes, the judgments, the skepticism. She was an outsider here, as much a mystery to them as the shadows that still clung to her from the storm. And yet, in the space between fear and awe, something fragile began to grow inside her. A spark of trust, however small, kindled by the undeniable presence of the man who had saved her. Rylan watched her carefully, a careful observer of her every movement, every flinch, every tremor. He was a puzzle wrapped in danger, and Mira sensed that beneath his commanding exterior there was something more. Pain, perhaps, or loneliness. She could feel it in the way he moved, the careful, deliberate restraint in his voice, the tension in his shoulders. And despite herself, she was drawn to it, curious in a way that frightened her. The beta moved closer again, hesitation still in his posture, but Rylan's glare froze him in place. There was no doubt who held authority here. Rylan's presence was magnetic, compelling, and terrifying all at once. Mira's heartbeat pounded in her chest, echoing the rhythm of the storm outside. She tried to steady her thoughts, but every glance, every flicker of those molten gold eyes made it impossible. She had survived the forest, survived the shadow wolves, survived the storm, but now, standing in the presence of this alpha, she realized she had never faced anything as consuming, as frightening, and as exhilarating as him. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other in silence. She, soaked and trembling, a mix of fear and fascination coursing through her veins. He, powerful and inscrutable, measuring, protecting, assessing. The room around them seemed to fade, the storm, the whispering wolves, even the world itself, until it was just the two of them, suspended in a fragile equilibrium of danger, trust, and something neither could yet name. Rylan finally spoke, his voice low, a growl barely restrained. "You're not ready for what's coming, Mira Vale. But I will keep you alive, even if you don't believe it yet." She shivered, though she couldn't tell if it was from cold, fear, or something deeper, something stirring inside her that she had never felt before. Protection, intensity, desire, and the unspoken promise of something dangerous, something inevitable. The night stretched on, filled with quiet whispers, tentative movements, and the storm outside that had yet to release its full fury. Mira knew she was not yet safe, not truly, but for the first time since she had run into the dark forest, she felt a spark of hope. Because the Alpha had appeared, because for the first time in her life, someone might just understand her power. And because somewhere beneath the fear and the chaos, she knew, deep in her bones, that the night was only just beginning. If this story pulls you in, subscribe to Moonlight Mate Stories. Every full moon we tell tales that make your heart race. The night was quiet inside the Silver Ridge safe house, but Mira Vale's mind was anything but. She sat curled on the edge of a bench, her knees drawn to her chest, rain still dripping from her hair, mud streaked across her arms, and the amulet pressed against her heart like a fragile pulse of hope. The room smelled faintly of pine and smoke, the hearth's warmth doing little to chase away the chill that had seeped into her bones during the storm. Outside, the forest whispered, the wind through the trees like the hushed voices of unseen predators, a reminder that safety was never permanent. Mira's gaze drifted to the shadows that clung to the corners of the room, the flicker of firelight casting uncertain patterns on the walls. And there, in that uncertain glow, her mind returned to a place she had spent too long trying to forget. A place filled with smoke, screaming, and the scent of burning wood. Her home, her pack's sanctuary, had been nothing but ash when she had fled. The elders, those she had trusted, had branded her a witch-born, a danger, a girl whose uncontrolled silver flame could destroy everything she touched. She remembered the fear in her mother's eyes, the final, desperate attempt to shield her from the devastation that had erupted from her own hands that were meant to heal, not burn. But even as she remembered, she could feel the residue of that power inside her, a dormant storm coiled beneath her skin, eager and terrifying. Mira swallowed, her throat tight with the memory. Every heartbeat was a drum of warning, a reminder that she could never be ordinary, that the world around her would never allow it. Her fingers brushed the amulet, and for a brief moment she imagined it glowing, its light a mirror of her own untamed energy. And then, through the haze of her memories, she sensed him. Rylan Thorne, Alpha of Silver Ridge, scarred, commanding, and yet, hesitant in ways she hadn't expected, he was observing her from across the room, his stance protective but distant, like a sentinel who was both guarding her and holding back. Every movement, every flicker of his golden eyes seemed measured, controlled. He didn't move closer yet, but the pull between them was undeniable, like a thread woven into their fates. She felt it first in the small, involuntary tensing of her shoulders, the way her chest fluttered at the thought of him. Then came the subtle scent, the warmth of his presence, the faint musk that reminded her of the wild, of night air, of danger wrapped in something strangely familiar, something that spoke to a bond she didn't understand, a connection deeper than logic, older than fear. Rylan's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he stepped closer, and Mira's breath caught. There was a war within him, she could feel it, duty versus desire, counsel obligations versus instinct, caution versus something primal that drew him toward her like a current pulling at her very soul. He was bound by laws and lineage, by expectations of the Silver Ridge pack, yet he could not ignore the undeniable thread of attraction, the hint of a mate bond whispering beneath the surface. Her heart clenched at the realization. She was drawn to him, yes, but fear twisted the longing into something sharper. One misstep, one uncontrolled flicker of her silver flame, and everything would collapse. She remembered the horror in her pack's eyes the day her powers had erupted, the way they had turned against her, the fire in her hands almost consuming her mother in its rush. She would not repeat that. Not here, not now. I'm dangerous, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft crackle of the hearth and the distant murmur of the forest. I can't be trusted. Rylan's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, his expression unreadable, as though weighing the weight of her words against something he could not deny. The tension between them was a tangible thing, pulsing in the air like electricity. Mira's body hummed with the unspoken recognition of his presence, a magnetism that made her knees weak, her chest ache, and yet her mind scream caution. You are not what they say, he finally murmured, his voice low, rough, carrying the weight of authority and something softer beneath it, something almost tender. I can feel it, Mira. You are more than the fear they want you to be. She flinched at his words, not because of their kindness, but because of the truth embedded in them. He saw her, all of her, the fire, the fear, the strength she tried to hide. And in his gaze there was no judgment. Just recognition. Recognition and something dangerously close to longing. Her mind raced back again, to the nights she had spent alone in the forest, hiding from those who had once called her family. She had learned to survive in silence, to swallow her tears, to clamp down on the fire that burned inside her chest. But the memory of that exile, of the smoke, the screams, the weight of betrayal, was too heavy to ignore. She pressed the amulet to her chest, the small warmth a fragile anchor to the present. Rylan moved closer, and the scent of him grew stronger, mingling with the earthy aroma of rain-soaked pine and the faint tang of fire from the hearth. He stopped just short of reaching her, his golden eyes fixed on hers, measuring, assessing, but with a softness that made her chest tighten. The air between them thrummed with an unspoken question, an unspoken invitation. Could she trust him, or would the past swallow her whole again? "I can't," she whispered again, shaking her head. "Not yet. Not after everything." He nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight of her words without pressing further. But the pull remained, an invisible tether connecting them. Mira could feel it in the way his eyes lingered, in the subtle shift of his stance, in the quiet hum of power that surrounded him. He was not like the others, not like those who had turned against her, who had branded her cursed. And yet, the storm outside still raged, a reminder that danger had not disappeared. Shadow wolves might be gone for now, but the world beyond this safe house was unforgiving. Every pack, every council, every whispered word of prophecy could turn against her in an instant. She had survived exile and fire, but could she survive the expectations of an alpha who could command entire packs with a glance? Rylan's hand brushed against the edge of the bench, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, but he did not touch her. It was a gesture that said everything without words. "I am here. I am aware. I will protect you, even if the world does not." Her gaze dropped to her hands, trembling as they rested on her knees. She wanted to run, wanted to hide in the shadows where no one could see her, where her power could not hurt anyone again. But the pull toward him, the silent bond that whispered in her veins, was stronger than fear. She couldn't ignore it. "You're bound to someone else," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper, the words tasting of bitter truth. "A noble Luna, for your counsel, your pack, I'm nothing." Rylan's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would say nothing, would retreat behind the walls of duty that had always defined him. But then he stepped closer, the faintest shift in his stance, the air around him tightening with a promise she could feel in her bones. "You are something I cannot ignore," he said, voice low, magnetic, raw. "I don't know how or why, but I feel it, Mira. I feel you, and I won't let you face the world alone." The words cut through her fear like a blade wrapped in warmth. Mira's heart thundered, wild and uncontrolled, and she felt a flicker of the silver flame stirring deep within, tentative, dangerous, and beautiful. She pressed her hands against her chest again, as if to contain it, to keep it from consuming her. But Rylan's presence made it harder to suppress, harder to hide. Outside, the storm began to ease, as though the world itself had recognized the fragile electric moment forming in the small room. The shadows of the forest seemed to retreat, the wind softened, and the faint scent of wet earth mingled with the warmth of the hearth and the raw magnetic energy between them. Mira realized then, with a mix of fear and longing, that she was not just drawn to him. She was tethered, bound in ways she could not yet understand. A bond whispered through the silver flame in her veins, through the pull of destiny, through the unspoken connection that neither time nor distance could break. And Rylan Thorne, the scarred alpha of Silver Ridge, knew it too. He was conflicted, yes, duty-bound to a world she did not yet belong to, but he could not ignore the magnetic, dangerous, undeniable pull that tied him to her. He could not walk away, no matter how hard he tried. For the first time in her life, Mira felt seen. Moonlight draped the moonstone grove like a silken veil, soft silver spilling across the ground, over twisted roots and jagged stones. The air was thick with mist, curling and coiling through the trees, like spirits watching, waiting. Mira Vale's boots sank slightly in the damp moss as she followed Rylan through the grove, every step echoing the pounding of her own heartbeat. The poisoned wolf they carried, its flanks rising and falling in shallow gasps, quivered under her trembling touch. the silver amulet against her chest warming as though sensing the gravity of the moment. Mira's fingers brushed the ancient runes etched into the stones surrounding the grove. They pulsed faintly, resonating with something deep inside her, something she had never fully understood until now. The silver flame within her stirred, flickering like a candle in a gusting wind, threatening to blaze forth uncontrollably. She pressed her palm against a jagged rune, and a line of silver light traced across her wrist, forming a sigil she did not recognize. The mark glowed, warm and alive, and a shiver ran through her body as if the very forest had drawn her in and acknowledged her. Rylan's eyes narrowed, molten gold scanning her face, sensing every twitch of fear, every tremor of awe. He stepped closer, yet kept a careful distance, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of magic and destiny. "Mira, don't," he murmured, but his voice betrayed uncertainty, a rare break in the Alpha's usual commanding tone. "Not yet. Let me guide you." Mira shook her head, the fog curling around her like a living thing. "I can't. I don't know what this is," she whispered, voice cracking, her breath forming misty clouds in the chill night air. Her pulse pounded in her ears, and the mark on her wrist throbbed with its own heartbeat in perfect sync with her fear. "Why me? Why now?" A sudden gust of wind rustled the ancient trees, and the runes flared brighter, illuminating the grove in ethereal light. Mira's vision blurred, shadows dancing at the edge of her sight, and a voice older than memory itself, whispered through the night, "The flame-bearer lives. The one born under eclipse shall unite, or destroy." Mira stumbled backward, her heart hammering in panic. Her hands trembled, the amulet slipping slightly from her grip. The silver mark burned hotter now, crawling across her skin like liquid moonlight. Her knees buckled, and Rylan's arms were suddenly around her, steadying her before she fell. His breath was warm against her hair, grounding her, calming the storm of magic and terror within her chest. "Shh, listen to me," Rylan said softly, his golden eyes locking on hers. "I've got you. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not here, not now." But Mira's mind was a tempest. The prophecy words replayed in her head, echoing louder with every heartbeat. Unite or destroy. How could she bear such a weight? She had barely survived being branded a witch-born, barely survived the chaos of her first uncontrolled flames. Now, the forest, the silver runes, even Rylan's presence seemed to demand something far beyond her comprehension. The elder seer emerged from the shadows, their robes brushing the damp moss. They froze, gasping as they glimpsed the glowing mark on Mira's wrist. It cannot be," the seer breathed, voice trembling with reverence and fear. "The flame-bearer, she lives." Mira recoiled slightly, the air around her growing tense, charged with power and expectation. I'm not her," she said, though the words rang hollow even to her ears. "I'm just me. I don't know how to do this." The seer's gaze softened, yet it carried an urgency that made Mira shiver. "Child of the flame, you have been chosen. Your fire, your bloodline, your very existence, it is the key. The eclipse marked you long before you knew it. The Pax, the world, they wait for your choice." Rylan's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder, grounding her once more. He lowered his voice so that only she could hear. "You are not alone in this. Whatever they say, whatever they demand, I will stand with you, but you must trust me. Can you do that, Mira?" Her throat constricted as she nodded, unable to speak. The truth of his words resonated deep in her chest. Trust was a foreign concept, something she had been denied all her life, yet she felt it, raw and unyielding, tethered to her very soul. She could feel his heartbeat in sync with hers, a slow, steady rhythm that fought against the chaotic pulse of magic inside her. The forest shifted again, the moonlight slicing through the fog, casting the runes in stark relief. Whispers filled the air, soft and ethereal, speaking in languages lost to time. Mira felt herself pulled toward the central stone, the largest of the runes, and instinctively placed her hands upon it. Energy surged through her, not violent like before, but controlled, like a river finding its path. The mark on her wrist blazed brighter, illuminating her fear, her doubt, her courage all at once. Rylan stepped beside her, his presence unwavering, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "You are stronger than you think," he murmured, voice low and magnetic. "And this power, it's yours to control. Not them, not fate, not the prophecy. Yours." Mira drew a shaky breath, the silver flame in her veins responding, a warmth that spread through her limbs, easing the terror that had gripped her since childhood. The poisoned wolf lay nearby, its chest rising and falling more steadily now, as if Mira's touch, her bond with the runes, had eased the sickness within. Yet even as relief settled in, a new awareness struck her, the weight of responsibility. The prophecy wasn't just about healing, it wasn't just about power, it was about choice, and the choice was terrifying. Every pack, every alpha, every council member would look to her to decide the future. Unite them, or destroy them. The thought alone made her stomach twist. Rylan sensed the storm brewing in her mind. He reached out, gently lifting her chin so her golden brown eyes met his molten gaze. "Mira Vale," he said, voice soft but firm. "I don't know what comes next. But I do know this. You are not alone, and whatever path you choose, I will walk it with you." The whispering winds grew louder, the fog swirling like spirits gathering around them. Mira felt the weight of the prophecy pressed against her chest, yet in that moment, the pull toward Rylan, the tether that bound them, anchored her. She was still frightened, still uncertain, but she was not broken. Not yet. The elder seer stepped closer again, placing a gnarled hand on Mira's shoulder. "Remember this, child. The flame-bearer's heart must guide her hands, or the world will burn." Mira nodded, feeling the words resonate in her chest. The runes beneath her fingers glowed softly, a promise, a warning, and a reminder of the destiny that awaited her. She drew a deep breath, feeling the power thrumming within her like a coiled storm, a force that could either heal or destroy. And as her gaze met Rylan's once more, she knew that whatever the future held, she would not face it alone. The grove seemed to breathe with her, mist curling higher, moonlight slicing through the trees, illuminating every shadow and every secret. The prophecy had awakened, yes, but so had something deeper, a connection, a bond that could defy fear, exile, and destiny itself. And in that quiet, mist-filled grove, under the pale light of the moon, Mira Vale, the flame-bearer, made her first choice. Not about prophecy, not about power, but about trust, about connection, about taking the first step into the fire with someone who would not let her burn alone. The forest whispered again, words she could almost understand, but she didn't need to hear them. She felt them. She felt the pull of destiny, the call of power, and the magnetic presence of the Alpha standing by her side. And for the first time in a lifetime of exile and fear, she believed that she might survive. The council hall, carved deep into the heart of Silver Ridge, was alive with a tense silence that pressed against Mira's chest. Shadows flickered across the stone walls, thrown by the torches lining the room, and the scent of pine smoke mingled with the coppery tang of fear. Wolves of every size and rank gathered in uneasy clusters, eyes sharp, ears twitching. Tension coiled in the air, like a predator ready to strike, and Mira could feel it thrumming through the floor beneath her feet. Her pulse was jagged, her fingers clenching at her sides, the silver amulet against her chest warm, almost burning. Then the doors shattered. Wood splintered, and a roar ripped through the hall, feral, commanding, and full of malice. The Bloodfang pack had arrived. Alpha Kyle, tall and brutal, with scars that mapped the battles of his life across his grey-furred face, stepped through the breach, eyes like cold steel. Behind him, his warriors surged forward, their snarls echoing, paws thudding against the stone floor. Panic ignited the room, wolves scattered, howls colliding with shouts, the sound almost deafening. Mira's chest tightened as instinct flared, the same instinct that had saved her countless times in the cursed forests of her past. Her hands lifted almost involuntarily, silver light licking from her fingertips, tendrils of flame curling like living smoke. The air crackled with magic, thick and oppressive, and even the torches flared in protest. Rylan was beside her in an instant, eyes molten gold, every muscle taut, his presence a shield and a warning. "Mira, control it, don't." His voice was both command and plea, but before he could finish, the Bloodfangs lunged, teeth bared, claws flashing. She felt herself act on pure instinct. Silver flame erupted, arcing in a protective wave, searing the air, illuminating terrified and awestruck faces alike. Wolves stumbled back, some singed, some staring wide-eyed as the light reflected in their eyes. Mira's magic surged through her veins like wildfire, and for a moment, the entire hall was bathed in a luminous, almost otherworldly glow. The Wolf Council froze. Whispers and gasps filled the space, trembling voices calling her a curse reborn, and murmuring fears that had long been buried but now clawed their way to the surface. Mira's heart clenched at the words. Her own fear mirrored in their eyes, yet the power within her refused to wane. She was saving them. Yet somehow, she already felt the weight of their judgment. Kyle roared again, a challenge wrapped in venom, his warriors advancing despite the brilliant barrier of silver flame. Mira's palms burned, and sweat stung her eyes. Every fibre of her being screamed to protect, to fight, to survive, but the energy coursing through her made her limbs tremble, made the very stones beneath her feet hum. The poison lessons of her past, the exile, the shame, the fire that once consumed everything she loved, rose in her chest, threatening to swallow her whole. Rylan's voice cut through the chaos, low and commanding, a tether for her spiraling mind. "If she burns, I burn too." His declaration was not for the enemy, it was for the council. For those whispering, for the pack that wavered. He stepped forward, placing himself between Mira and the advancing Bloodfangs, his golden eyes locking on hers for just a heartbeat. The tension between them was almost tangible, a taut wire vibrating with fear, desire, and unspoken promises. Mira drew in a ragged breath, feeling the duality of her power and her fear. The silver flame coiled around her wrists, responding to her pulse, her fear, and her resolve. She was no longer hiding. The battle demanded she rise fully into the force she carried, whether the world understood it or not. The Bloodfang Alpha faltered at the sight, the power blazing from a woman they had underestimated, the light in her eyes refusing to bow to fear or death. Rylan moved with her, a symphony of grace and strength. Every protective stance he took, every motion to shield her, deepened the fragile thread binding them. Mira felt it, a tether stronger than fear, stronger than the whispers of the council. In that moment, she realized she wasn't alone, not against them, not against destiny. And yet, the council's murmurs grew louder, accusing her, fearing what she was, questioning what she would become. The clash escalated. Sparks of silver light met claw and fang, the air thick with smoke, magic, and the electric tension of battle. Mira's magic surged, weaving a protective cocoon around injured wolves, and each breath of flame, each wave of silver light, carried with it not just defense, but a declaration. She would not be bound by fear, by judgment, or by anyone's expectation of who she should be. Kyle snarled, recognition dawning with unease. The power of a single flame-bearer was not something any pack could casually challenge, yet he attacked anyway, driven by ambition, vengeance, and the belief that fear could control the uncontrollable. Mira met his gaze, her own eyes alight, her every heartbeat synced to the pulse of her magic, and she felt the mantle of destiny pressing down, not as a burden, but as a challenge she could not refuse. Rylan's presence remained her anchor, his hand brushing hers as he countered Kyle's strikes, a silent promise woven into every motion. We face this together. Yet Mira could sense his internal conflict, the duty to his counsel, the threat to his pack, the danger of standing beside her openly. Every glance, every subtle movement was loaded with unspoken tension, fear, and an undeniable spark that neither chaos nor fire could extinguish. Smoke and flame coiled around Mira, curling in ribbons that mirrored her uncertainty and her courage. The room, once a place of diplomacy and hushed voices, had transformed into a stage for a battle that was not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. Allies watched, torn between fear and awe, while enemies hesitated, sensing that the power before them was something ancient, untamed, and unavoidable. Rylan's growl rumbled through the hall, commanding attention. "Enough!" His voice sliced through the chaos like a blade. Wolves froze mid-leap, claws paused in mid-air. He advanced, unwavering, a sentinel of gold and strength beside the woman who wielded the silver flame. "She is ours. You will not touch her." The tension cracked like thunder. Kyle stepped back, his bravado faltering as he witnessed the unbreakable bond forming under the firelight, the undeniable force of two destined souls standing side by side. Mira's chest heaved, the magic within her still pulsing, but she no longer trembled from fear alone. The council murmured among themselves, eyes wide, whispers sharp. But for Mira and Rylan, it no longer mattered. The first clash had erupted, power and destiny had collided. The world had fought back, yes, but in doing so, it had revealed the truth of who Mira was and the fragile, electrifying trust she and Rylan had begun to forge. As the last echoes of the skirmish faded, smoke curling into the moonlit hall, Mira's silver flame receded slightly, leaving her hands glowing faintly, a reminder of the strength she possessed and the fear she had conquered. She met Rylan's gaze once more, and in that molten gold stare, she saw what she had longed for: protection, understanding, and a tether unbroken by chaos or judgment. Yet even as relief washed over them, a shadow lingered at the edges of her mind. The council's fear, the whispers of curse reborn, and the rival Alpha's grudging recognition meant the world outside would never see her as anything but dangerous. And in that knowledge, Mira understood a chilling truth. This was only the beginning. The world would test her, challenge her, and force her to embrace the destiny she had once run from. But for now, in the quiet after the storm, Mira allowed herself a small, fleeting moment. The warmth of Rylan's presence, the power humming in her veins, and the undeniable promise that, together, they could face whatever came next. The forest was silent after the battle, unnaturally so. Ash still floated in the air like ghostly snow, silver motes shimmering under the pale light that slipped through the canopy. Mira followed Rylan through the trees, her steps unsteady, her body trembling not from weakness, but from everything that had just unfolded. Her power still hummed under her skin, restless, wanting to escape, to burn, to protect. But she forced it down. She couldn't let it loose again, not here, not now. Ahead, Rylan moved with purpose. His stride was steady, though blood streaked his arm, dark and glistening. He didn't wince, didn't pause, but Mira could see the faint stiffness in his movements, the mark of someone pushing through pain with sheer will. They crossed the river and followed its course until the roar of water grew louder. Echoing through the cliffs, a thin veil of mist curled around them, cool and fragrant with moss. Behind it, hidden from sight, a waterfall poured into a clear pool, and beneath the cascade, half concealed by stone and shadow, lay a hollow cave. Rylan pushed aside the curtain of vines at the entrance and motioned her inside. The sound of falling water softened as they stepped in. The cave swallowed it, turning it into a distant, steady heartbeat. Light filtered through the waterfall in rippling patterns, dancing across the damp stone walls. It was quiet, isolated, safe. Mira exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Rylan turned toward her, his gaze searching, golden eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said, voice low but not harsh. She met his eyes, her tone equally firm. "And you shouldn't have fought bleeding." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick, not with tension, but something heavier, unspoken things, shared danger, something raw. Rylan looked away first, moving to a stone ledge at the side of the cave. He sat heavily, peeling away what remained of his torn shirt. The gash along his ribs was deep, already bruising. Mira's breath caught. The sight of him, blood and muscle, strength and vulnerability woven together, stirred something she didn't want to name. She knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her cloak and dipping it in the cool pool of water. When her hand touched his skin, he flinched, not from pain, but from the heat that passed between them. His skin was fever-warm, his pulse unsteady under her fingers. She dabbed at the wound, slow and careful, her movements precise. Neither spoke. The rhythm of her breathing matched the rhythm of the waterfall outside. "Hold still," she murmured. "I am." His voice was barely a whisper, but it brushed against her like a touch. Her magic stirred, soft this time, gentle. A faint silver glow bloomed under her palm, spreading through the cloth, seeping into the wound. The flesh began to knit together, slowly, the angry red fading to pale pink. Rylan's jaw clenched as the pain ebbed. When she pulled her hand back, he caught her wrist. His touch wasn't rough, just firm, grounding. "You shouldn't waste your strength on me," he said quietly. Mira looked at him, really looked, at the exhaustion hidden beneath his control, the faint shadow in his eyes that spoke of too many burdens carried for too long. "It's not wasted," she said simply. "You stood between me and death. Let me do the same." Rylan's gaze lingered on her face, the defiance there, the warmth, the flicker of light in her eyes that reminded him too much of the moon, beautiful and unreachable. He let her go, slowly, as if his fingers didn't quite want to obey. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty. It was full, of breath, heartbeat, awareness. Mira finished binding the wound, her movements slowing as she realized just how close they were. His breath brushed her temple. His scent, pine, smoke, and the faint salt of blood, filled her lungs. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Mira swallowed. "You didn't have to say that in the hall," she murmured. "If she burns, I burn too." He turned his head slightly toward her, his expression unreadable. "I meant it." Her breath caught again. "Why?" "Because," he said, leaning in just enough that she could feel his words against her skin, "you shouldn't have to stand alone." She should have looked away, should have broken the spell that was pulling her closer, but she didn't. His voice, his warmth, the quiet vulnerability beneath his strength. It all pulled at something deep within her. "Rylan?" Her voice trembled, soft as the whisper of rain. He didn't move away. His gaze dipped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question hanging unspoken between them. The air grew dense, charged. Time slowed to a heartbeat. Mira felt it. The pull, the electricity, the hunger, restrained only by fear of what it might mean. His hand brushed her cheek, rough palm against soft skin. The touch was both anchor and temptation. She leaned in without thinking. The space between them vanished, almost. Then the sound came, A distant howl, sharp, urgent, carried through the rain and the forest beyond. A reminder that their world outside this cave was still burning, still hunting, still waiting to tear them apart. Rylan froze. Mira pulled back first, her pulse racing, her face pale with the sudden rush of reality. The air between them fractured. He rose, the movement fluid but edged with frustration. His golden eyes burned, not with anger, but with restraint. "They'll be looking for us," he said quietly. Mira turned toward the cave entrance, her heart still pounding. "Then we go." But he stopped her with a hand on her arm. "No, not yet." She looked back at him, confused, half afraid of the emotion still trembling in her chest. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice until it was barely a breath. "When this ends," his hand brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, the gentlest touch she had ever felt. "When this ends, I'll tell you everything." Mira's throat tightened. "And if it doesn't end?" He hesitated, the shadow in his eyes deepening. "Then you'll know why I never could." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she didn't yet understand. Outside, the rain thickened, drumming softly against the rocks. Inside, the glow of the waterfall light flickered across their faces. Two souls caught between war and want, duty and desire. Mira turned away first, her breath shaky. "You keep too many secrets, Alpha." "And you," he murmured, his tone low, magnetic, "shine too brightly for the dark I live in." Her heart stuttered. For a moment, she didn't know if it was fear or longing that made her pulse quicken. Maybe both. She sat again beside the pool, staring at her reflection, the faint shimmer of silver still pulsing beneath her skin. "I never asked for any of this," she whispered. "No one ever does," Rylan replied quietly. "But you can't keep running from it." Mira met his gaze in the rippling water. "You sound like you've been running too." A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. "Maybe I have." The rain deepened. The waterfall glowed like liquid light. And in that hidden place, for a single fragile hour, they allowed the world to pause. No councils, no enemies, no curses, just two souls who had both forgotten what it meant to feel safe, now caught in a silence that felt dangerously close to peace. But beneath that stillness was a current neither could ignore. Trust was a fragile thing, love even more so. And somewhere in the echo of the waterfall's rhythm, both understood that soon, very soon, one of them would have to choose between what their hearts wanted and what their fate demanded. The dawn came painted in ash and silence. The forest that once whispered to the moon now groaned beneath the weight of cold mist. The air was heavy, saturated with secrets that no longer wanted to stay buried. Mira woke to the sound of distant horns. The tone was not one of celebration, but of summons. A gathering. The council had called, and deep down she knew why. Rylan stood at the cave entrance, his back to her, shoulders tight, his silhouette cut against the dim morning light. Every inch the Alpha of Silver Ridge, but this morning his stance carried a tension she hadn't seen before, a hesitation. "They want you," he said finally, his voice flat, almost hollow. "The council demands to see you." Mira rose slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the quiet dread that comes when the past begins to repeat itself. "And you?" she asked softly. "Do you want me there?" Rylan turned, and for a heartbeat, she saw the man from last night, the one who let her heal his wounds and whispered promises he wasn't ready to keep. But then the Alpha returned, the leader, the one who had to think beyond his heart. "They won't stop until they have answers," he said. "You've hidden enough, Mira." Her eyes darkened. "I've hidden to survive." He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "And in doing so, you've made yourself a target." The words cut deep because they were true, but truth didn't dull the ache of betrayal when it finally came. They walked in silence toward the council grounds, a clearing surrounded by stone pillars engraved with the marks of the moon goddess. The air grew colder with every step. Wolves stood in formation, their eyes tracking her every move. Whispers carried through the crowd like smoke. Cursed one, flame-bearer, witch-born. Mira held her head high, though her heart pounded so hard it hurt. The elders stood in a half-circle. At the center, Elder Kale, his silver eyes sharp, his voice old as the mountains. Mira Vale, he said, his tone dripping with ceremonial gravity. You've been accused of crimes that brought ruin to your kin. Do you deny it? The question struck like lightning. She froze. For a moment, the sound of her own heartbeat drowned everything else. Rylan shifted beside her, but said nothing. Not yet. Not until she answered. I did not destroy them, she said finally. Her voice shook, then steadied. I tried to save them. Gasps, murmurs. One of the baiters stepped forward. Kale, Rylan's second. He had always looked at her with suspicion, and now there was something triumphant in his expression. She lies, Kale said, holding up a fragment of charred metal, a piece of a crest she recognized instantly. This was found in the ruins of the Hollow Den Pack. Her power burned through it. I saw it with my own eyes. Mira's breath hitched. You weren't there. You couldn't have. I was, Kale interrupted, voice rising. I saw the flames. I heard the screams. You unleashed that cursed light and watched your own pack burn. The world tilted. The air thinned. Mira's pulse roared in her ears. She turned to Rylan. He said nothing. Just watched her with eyes that flickered between trust and doubt. Tell me you don't believe him, she whispered. Rylan's jaw tightened. Mira, I want to. The pause between his words was a dagger. But the council. Her power surged before he could finish. The ground beneath her feet quivered, reacting to the storm inside her chest. The council, she said, voice low and trembling. You're choosing them over me? Rylan took a step forward, hands open. I'm choosing my pack. I have to protect them. And what about me, she asked. Who protects me? The silver flame sparked at her fingertips, wild and untamed. Wolves flinched back. Even Kale stepped away, his earlier confidence faltering. Elder Kale's voice rang out sharp as a blade. She cannot be trusted. Her power is not the gift of the moon, it's the curse of the void. The council's murmurs became a storm. Cursed, dangerous, unnatural. Rylan's hand hovered near hers, close but not touching. Mira, he said softly, please, stop before you can't. But she heard something break inside her, not a bone, not a spell. Something deeper, the quiet fracture of belief. She stepped back, her voice dropped to a whisper that carried like thunder. You said you'd tell me everything when this ended. I just didn't know you meant the truth about me. And then the world exploded. Silver light burst from her chest, raw and unfiltered. The air split open. Flames licked the edges of the clearing, but they weren't normal fire. They shimmered cold and bright, bending the air like heat and ice at once. Wolves scattered. Trees ignited. The river that cut through the clearing turned to frost under her scream. Mira's eyes glowed white-hot as she lifted her hands, unable to contain it anymore. You wanted the truth? She cried. Then see it. Rylan lunged forward, shouting her name, but it was too late. The ground cracked open. The stones of the council circle shattered. Power poured from her like blood, raw and unending. For a moment, she wasn't Mira Vale, the outcast healer. She was something older, something divine. Then, silence. The light vanished. Smoke curled through the clearing, thick and choking. When it cleared, Mira was gone. Only scorched earth and frozen river water remained where she had stood. Rylan dropped to his knees, the air around him heavy with the echo of her power. The wolves stared at him in stunned silence. Kyle stumbled backward, his face pale. She's become what the prophecy warned, Elder Kale whispered. The flame-bearer has risen, and she will burn this world clean. Rylan's hands clenched at his sides, blood dripping from his palms where his claws had pierced skin. "No," he growled. "She's not the curse. We are." But Mira couldn't hear him. Far away, deep in the wild beyond the ridge, she ran through snow and shadow. Her hair whipped in the wind, her heart beat a drum against the emptiness. Her tears turned to ice before they hit the ground. The amulet at her throat burned, with the same silver light as the moon above. The forest she touched burned behind her, and the river she crossed froze in her wake. Every step left a mark, half miracle, half ruin. Somewhere, the wolves whispered her name again, not as a woman, not as a healer. Not even as a cursed one. They whispered it like a legend reborn, the silver flame, the ghost of the moonfall, the girl who loved an alpha and brought kingdoms to their knees. And as the night fell, her figure disappeared into the mist. Her power pulsed through the land, restless and unyielding. She was alone again, but this time it wasn't weakness, it was rebirth. For the first time in her life, Mira Vale wasn't running from who she was. She was running toward it. The Bloodfangs had waited for this night. The red moon eclipse. The night when blood and shadow merged, when power could be stolen, when a soul could be broken. Mira stood at the edge of the stone altar, wrists bound in wolfsbane chains, her breath shallow, her heartbeat steady. The scent of iron, sweat, and fear clung to the cavern air. Torches flickered, their flames a mockery of her own, pale, trembling things compared to the silver inferno that pulsed inside her veins. She'd been captured days ago, betrayed by whispers, and lured into the forest where moonlight died beneath the trees. They'd told her she was the curse, the flame-born witch who would bring ruin if not sacrificed. Now, Alpha Darius of the Bloodfangs, towering, cruel-eyed, his fangs bared in triumph, stood before her. "The moon demands a price," he hissed, "and you, Silver Flame, are the perfect offering." He raised the ceremonial blade, a black shard carved from obsidian, slick with the blood of countless wolves. The crowd of dark-cloaked figures chanted around him, their voices thick with madness and devotion. But as the blade descended, the moon shifted. It wasn't the red eclipse they had expected. It was white fire, pure, celestial, blinding. The wolfsbane chains melted into mist. The runes beneath Mira's feet ignited with a silver glow, crawling up the walls, spreading through the stone like veins of lightning. Her eyes snapped open, no longer the color of shadow and sorrow, but molten silver. "I am not your sacrifice." The words weren't shouted. They rolled like thunder, soft yet unrelenting, carrying the power of centuries and storms. Flames erupted from her palms, not of destruction but of truth. They wrapped around her body like wings, crackling with divine fury. The Bloodfang screamed as the light reached them. It wasn't death that consumed them, but exposure. Their secrets, their lies, their hungers laid bare. Wolves dropped to their knees, sobbing as memories of bloodshed and betrayal flashed through their minds. And through the chaos, Rylan appeared. His armor was scorched, his skin streaked with battle and ash, but his eyes never left her. "Mira," his voice was low, broken, the sound of a man who had walked through fire and regret. He fell to his knees before her, not in worship, but in atonement. "Forgive me, let me fight by your side. I was blind, now I see what you are." Mira turned to him, the silver fire dimming just enough to show the tremor in her lips. "And what am I, Rylan?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Not a curse, not a weapon. You're the heart of the prophecy. You are the moon's chosen flame." For the first time in years, she believed him. The cavern began to tremble. Cracks split the altar as the power she had once feared now poured freely through her. Her flame reached upward, touching the moonlight, connecting heaven and earth, wolf and spirit. The eclipse shattered. Above, the moon turned silver-white, flooding the valley with ethereal light. Every wolf across the land felt it, an awakening. Their bones hummed, their hearts raced, their spirits linked as one. The old barriers between packs fell like dust in the wind. The prophecy whispered once more. One born under the eclipse shall unite or destroy the packs. And Mira chose unity. Rylan rose beside her, the fire reflecting in his golden eyes. Together they stood against the collapsing world, not as Alpha and outcast, but as equals bound by fate and forgiveness. Enemies came, drawn by the power. The Bloodfang remnants howled and lunged. Rylan shifted mid-motion, his wolf enormous and white as frost. Mira's fire flowed around him, forming an unbreakable halo. They fought as one, teeth and flame, claw and light. Each movement told a story, of trust regained, of pain endured, of love reborn in the ashes of fear. The ground split open, ancient runes exploding with silver light. The Bloodfangs fell back, their howls of rage turning into cries of awe. And then, silence. Only the sound of wind moving through the broken cavern, carrying whispers of rebirth. Mira stood panting, her chest rising and falling, her fire finally dimming to a soft glow around her skin. The world had changed. The air tasted new. "It's over," Rylan murmured, his hand finding hers. She shook her head gently, eyes still on the horizon. "No, this is the beginning." He smiled, a small aching thing full of hope. "Then let's begin together." Mira turned toward him, her hand trembling as she touched his cheek. For a heartbeat, time froze. The moon hung still, the flames quieted, and in that stillness, love bloomed without fear. Their lips met, not desperate, but certain, a vow sealed not by words, but by fire and blood, by the prophecy fulfilled. The silver flame was no longer a legend whispered by frightened packs. She was a symbol of strength, compassion, and unity. When Mira raised her hand to the night sky, the light responded. Silver threads spreading across the clouds, connecting every pack, every wolf, every heart. They knelt across mountains and valleys, whispering her name, not in fear, but in reverence. The flame-bearer lives, and beneath the moon's eternal glow, Mira whispered back, "No more chains, no more sacrifice, only freedom." The prophecy's final echo rang through the night, softer than wind, brighter than dawn. Where there was fire, there shall be light. Where there was division, there shall be one pack, one heart, one flame. The battlefield had fallen silent. Where once the roar of wolves and the crackle of fire filled the night, now there was only wind, soft, trembling, carrying the scent of smoke and silver. Mira stood at the heart of it all. The ground beneath her was scorched black, yet small shoots of green already pushed through the ash. The earth, like her, was beginning to heal. Rylan stood beside her, his chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm of exhaustion and awe. His once golden armor now dulled by soot, his eyes shadowed with what they had both endured. The moon hung heavy above them, no longer red, no longer cruel, but luminous, vast, and silent. Its light fell across Mira's face like a blessing, and for the first time since the night she was exiled, she didn't flinch from its touch. The packs watched from the edge of the valley, wolves from rival clans standing side by side, uncertain, hesitant, yet alive. None dared move, none dared speak. They looked at Mira as one might look upon a storm that had finally chosen to pass them by. Some saw salvation, others saw a warning. Most saw something they could not yet name. Rylan's hand brushed hers, careful, reverent, as though she were still made of flame. "They're afraid," he murmured. Her gaze stayed on the horizon, where the light of dawn began to bleed through the mist. "They should be." Then softer, almost to herself. "I was afraid too." The quiet between them stretched long and fragile. Rylan finally turned to her, voice thick with the ache of everything unsaid. "You could have destroyed us all." Her lips curved faintly, neither smile nor sorrow. "I almost did." "Why didn't you?" She looked at him then, truly looked, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of every fire she'd survived, every scar she'd hidden, every tear she'd never let fall. "Because someone finally believed I could be more than what I was born to be." Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from truth. Rylan's throat tightened. There were no grand declarations left in him, no speeches of destiny or devotion. Only a heartbeat, raw and steady, and the knowledge that everything between them was now built on ashes and choice. "Mira," he whispered, "what happens now?" She turned her face to the wind. "Now, we see who they choose to follow, the fire or the fear." The moonlight dimmed as dawn crept in, painting the valley gold. Smoke curled through the morning air, carrying fragments of the night that had changed everything. And somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled. It was not a sound of mourning. It was a call, low, deep, unbroken. Another answered, then another, until the entire valley sang. Mira closed her eyes, each howl wrapped around her like a thread of belonging, pulling her back into a world that once rejected her. But deep inside, she knew unity came at a price. Power never disappeared. It only shifted hands. And though the prophecy had ended, destiny seldom stayed quiet. As the wolves howled, she felt something stir beneath the earth, faint like a heartbeat under stone. The runes carved into the cavern walls miles away glowed again, silver veins pulsing in rhythm with her own. A whisper slid through the air, not quite sound, not quite thought. "Flame-bearer, balance is never still." Mira's breath caught. She looked toward the horizon where the mist met the mountains, and for an instant she thought she saw a shadow move there, something vast, something watching. But when she blinked, it was gone. Still, the unease lingered, threading through the calm like a warning. Rylan noticed the shift in her expression. "What is it?" She hesitated. Then, "The prophecy was never about one war. It was about all of them." He frowned, stepping closer, his scent grounding her. "Then we'll face them together." "Together," she echoed, though her voice carried the weight of uncertainty. Because deep down, she could feel it. The world wasn't done testing her yet. The silver flame had been claimed. But power always came with a shadow. Mira knelt and placed her palm on the scorched ground. The silver mark on her wrist shimmered faintly, responding to the earth's quiet hum. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Rylan crouched beside her, his larger hand covering hers. "What?" "Life. It's already growing back." He looked at her, at the faint smile curving her lips. The firelight danced across her face, soft and human again. For that moment, he saw not the flame-bearer, not the prophecy, not the power that could burn worlds, but the woman who had chosen mercy over vengeance. And he knew that, no matter what came next, he would follow her anywhere. The sun broke the horizon. The night was finally over. Mira rose slowly, turning toward the gathered packs. Her hair moved with the breeze, black with threads of silver light, her presence both fierce and fragile. "Go home," she said softly. "There's no more blood to spill." The wolves shifted back, their forms flickering between fur and flesh. They stared at her, uncertain, waiting. "Your world doesn't end because you feared me," she continued. "It begins because you finally saw me." A long pause. Then, from the back of the crowd, a young wolf stepped forward. A girl, barely 16, eyes wide, trembling. She bowed low, then whispered the first word of the new age, "Luna." One by one, the others followed. "Luna, Luna, Luna." Until the valley trembled again, not with war, but with reverence. Mira's throat tightened. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it, But destiny rarely asked what she wanted. Still, this time she wouldn't run. She lifted her chin, the silver light in her veins steady and sure. "Then I'll lead you," she said, "but not as a goddess, as one of you." The scene softened, the crowd fading, the world blurring to a glow of fire and moonlight. The narrator's voice lowered, calm, haunting, full of ache and wonder. And so the silver flame walked among them, not as myth, not as monster, but as the choice between fear and faith. The packs would rebuild, the moon would rise again. But the question would remain. The voice lingered, quiet now, almost like a whisper against the ear. Would you have chosen her, or feared her too? The wind sighed through the valley. A final shimmer of silver fire arced across the sky, fading into dawn. If this story lit something inside you, the voice softened, melting into the quiet heartbeat of the world. Subscribe to Moonlight Mate Stories, because under this moon, a smile in the tone, a promise in the air, we tell tales that burn. The valley had gone quiet again. Only the soft murmur of the wind moved through the ruins, whispering over the charred stones and broken banners that marked the end of a war no one had truly won. The moon, so bright only moments ago, now dimmed behind a veil of drifting clouds, its silver glow swallowed by shadow. The silver flame had burned, cleansed, and healed, but the earth beneath still trembled faintly, as though it remembered every scream, every vow, every drop of blood spilled in its soil. And somewhere in that stillness, something stirred. Mira stood alone at the cliff's edge now. The others had gone, some to rebuild, some to mourn. Rylan had lingered for as long as he could, his gaze saying what his lips could not. But even he knew she needed this silence, this moment between worlds to breathe again. The wind pulled at her hair, carrying with it the scent of ash and pine. Beneath her, the river roared far below, swollen with melted snow and silver reflections of the dying moon. She looked down at her hands. The faint mark on her wrist, the symbol of the silver flame, still shimmered softly, like the last ember of a fire that refused to die. "It should be over," she whispered. "It should be peace." But deep inside, the pulse of her power still beat in sync with something unseen, something vast, something waiting. The air shifted, cold, electric. A sound like a heartbeat echoed from somewhere beyond the cliffs. Slow, steady, not her own. Thump, thump, thump. It resonated through the stone, through her bones, through the air itself. Her breath caught as her eyes lifted toward the distant ridges across the valley. The mist there moved differently, like it was alive. Shapes shimmered and then faded, a flicker of light, then darkness swallowing it whole. And then she saw her. High upon the opposing cliff stood a silhouette, still as stone, outlined by the faintest ripple of moonlight. A woman, tall, cloaked, unmoving. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt thin, almost non-existent, as though the air itself were holding its breath. Then the wind shifted again, and the stranger's hood fell back. Her face was half hidden by shadow, but her eyes glowed with the same silver fire that lived within Mira's veins. Identical, ancient, terrifying. Mira's pulse raced. Her first instinct was to reach for the mark on her wrist, but before her fingers could touch it, the symbol flared on its own. Silver light spiraling upward, wrapping her arm like living flame. The woman across the ravine tilted her head, almost amused. And then, her voice came, not through sound, but through thought, soft as mist, yet sharp enough to cut. "She is not the only one with fire in her blood." Mira's heart stopped. The whisper wasn't just in her mind, it echoed through the entire valley. The ground itself seemed to vibrate, trees bending in reverence or fear. "You woke the flame, sister, but you were never meant to control it alone." Mira took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, but the figure only smiled, a slow, knowing curve of lips. And as the clouds passed over the moon, swallowing the light, the woman vanished, leaving nothing but the faint echo of her voice. "This isn't over." The silence that followed was heavy, alive, aware. Mira's heartbeat pounded in her ears, matching the rhythm of the one that had called from beneath the cliffs. She turned slowly toward the horizon, where the dawn should have been, but instead of the soft pink glow of sunrise, there was only a strange shimmer, a faint ripple in the sky, like heat waves rising from cold air. The mark on her wrist burned hotter, not pain, a warning. Far below, the river began to churn. The water glowed faintly silver before darkening to black, swirling in unnatural patterns. Mira knelt, reaching out toward the edge, but the moment her reflection appeared in the water, she gasped. It wasn't her face staring back. The reflection's eyes were brighter, wilder, filled with a hunger she didn't recognize. It smiled, and for a split second, Mira saw another mark, identical to hers, etched across that reflection's other wrist. The two symbols pulsed together, in rhythm, across the surface of the river, like twin flames calling to each other. Then the reflection faded, swallowed by the dark. The earth shifted beneath her feet. A deep rumble rolled through the valley. In the distance, lightning flashed, silent, white, unnatural. It cut across the horizon, forming for just a breath the faint outline of something vast. Wings, then gone. Mira rose to her feet, eyes wide, chest tight. Whatever peace she had earned tonight was already cracking apart. The silver flame was not just power, it was a thread, and now someone else was pulling on the other end. The narrator's voice deepened, low, resonant, threading through the silence like the voice of prophecy itself. The moon wanes, the fire sleeps, but shadows remember. A pause, a heartbeat. In every age, one flame rises to heal, and another to burn. And now, two hearts carry the same light. Mira looked to the sky one last time. The moon broke free of the clouds, its pale face shining weakly across the land. But there, near its edge, a new mark had appeared. Small, dark, spreading like a bruise. An eclipse, the first warning of another night to come. The wind carried a new sound then, soft, rhythmic, impossible to trace. A chant, ancient, low, whispered not by one voice but by many. Fire to flesh, blood to moon, balance undone, balance reborn. The sound rippled through the air, through the trees, through the bones of the mountains themselves. The silver flame on Mira's wrist flickered violently, and then dimmed, as if bowing to the chant. The mark still glowed faintly beneath her skin, but it no longer felt like her own. She swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she whispered again, to no one. The answer came on the wind. "The other half." The narrator's voice softened now, quiet, reverent, fading like the last light of a dying fire. And so, as peace found breath, darkness took shape once more. The silver flame had chosen her, but the shadows had chosen another. And somewhere beyond the mountains, another story began. A pause. The faint sound of a heartbeat returned, slower this time, heavy, uneven. She is not the only one with fire in her blood. The sound of a wolf's howl broke through the quiet, long, low, distant, then another, and another. The air pulsed with their calls until it became impossible to tell if it was morning or warning. The narrator's final words came in a whisper, barely there, like the brush of breath across the listener's ear. The moon may rest, but this story does not. This isn't over. Soft, echoing moon chant rises, ethereal, ancient, unearthly. Under the moon, all fire remembers its name. If this story touched you, subscribe, like, and share, because every full moon, new tales rise here at Moonlight Mate Stories.